G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I don't play favorites, but there are some episodes that definitely do kind of make me tick, and getting clients to come on is certainly one of the real enjoyments that I get, and I'm super fortunate that Carla Schesser is joining us. G'day Carla, how you doing?
Hey Aaron, I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. I say it takes a brave person because this is not your gig. But I want to say thank you so much, because the story that you've got, the journey that you've been on is going to inspire so many others. And that's what I want to commend you for as well. We're not going to pop the hood and talk all numbers, for example, but what we are going to do is talk about, Carla, your journey to going from where you started to where you are now is a real testament, one, to your tenacity, two, to trusting the team around you, but three, you had a self-belief that you're like, I'm not going to take no for an answer. And that's something that a real conviction in you. You're seeing the fruits of that labor as well. So I want to say kudos to you. I really can't wait to share your journey and your story, mate. I'm excited. How are you feeling?
I'm excited to have a chat. Anytime I chat to you, it's always, a good time. So bring it on.
I love it. Thank you very much. So let's, like all good journeys, let's start a little bit about yourself personally and take us through what you've done on a personal level, and then we'll talk about, I guess, your career and what you do for a crust as well, and then we'll unpack your property journey.
Cool. So I just turned 30 a couple of weeks ago. So
happy birthday.
No longer in my 20s. I don't know how I feel about that. But so 30, live just outside the Gold Coast. So not originally from Australia, though. I was born in South Africa. My parents immigrated themselves, my sister and I, when I was about 13, 14. So originally, from South Africa, did my high school here in Australia, in Cairns, and then moved to the Gold Coast. That's where I started working for a company called 5x5. I think you actually had John, our founder, on the show a few months back. I started working there about 7 years ago, and I'm still there. So I've had a bit of a journey at 5x5 as well. Started as a project manager, then sort of moved to the CEO role, and then this year I've headed up more of the innovation of the business. So like I said, you've had John on the show, and he's kind of been one of those people in my corner from a property perspective. So I've learned a lot from him. And then, he's kind of been one of the people besides you, I guess, that I get a lot of my inspiration from and mentorship from. I think that probably sums it up.
You're spot on there. And that's what I feel like you'll rise to the caliber of, maybe it's the 5 closest people around you, or the level of, the sophistication in your team as well. But there's people that come along, like John's one of them. I've got a number of other clients, for example. They're just they believe in this so much that it just comes out from them. They're like, hey mate, you've got to buy property. You've just got to do it. And they do my job for me effectively. And then they'll tell someone like you, and they come to us and like, I've been told I have to buy property. Tell me how. And you become such a student as part of that, just going, I'm already so sold on the idea of it. Now I just need to be shown how as well, right? I think that's part of the battle where some people go, I'm not really sure about this property thing. I might dabble, for example, but you were just like, no, I'm going all in because I've been told this works.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I had no choice being surrounded by John pretty much every work day, and sort of that's the conversation that we were having, right? Is him sort of asking the question, what's your plan when it comes to housing? Are you going to buy? Where are you going to buy? What does that look like? Do you have a plan? So exactly right. It's like the people that you surround yourself with, by osmosis, you just happen to kind of share their beliefs and sort of take what they say and run with it.
And it changes the entire conversation that you have, say, with John, who's your leader in the business. And you go, right, you're not just coming in here and trading your time for a paycheck and off you go willy-nilly, and then you have to come and ask for more. And you probably see this in the team when you're CEO of the business. People come and go, I need a pay rise. You're like, what are you going to do with this extra money? And the question, you just see it in their eyes. They're going, I don't really know, but I just need to know I'm worth more money. And you're like, yeah, but what are you going to do with this money? And the second you go, you should be buying property, you should be investing. It's like, okay, this is not how I expected the conversation to go. So when you've had that with team, you go, hang on, are you buying property, for example? And that conversation you have with John, What was that moment that you realized, hey, look, I've got to stop seeing my paycheck as trading my time and go, I've got to leverage this paycheck to build income producing assets?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it also, for me, came to the constant conversation that I would have with John and just like other sort of mentors in my life around, well, what does, your life look like in 5, 10 years time? And what are the sort of actions that you need to be taking now in order to realize that dream life in a decade or 2 decades time, and sort of working back from there. And so it's kind of like, it's funny, it's more of a, I have a more of an understanding of it now, looking backwards than potentially what I did, knowing that the actions that I took at that time would make such a big difference, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So, as an example, like for me, it was just, I knew I needed to enter the property market however I could. I think like a lot of the conversation that I have with my peers now, it's always sort of, um, they want to enter the market sort of buying that dream house or buying the 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom property rather than potentially looking at their current circumstances or situation, and maybe buying that apartment that they can afford based on borrowing capacity or,
Mm.
just deposit that they have. So for me, it was just my first step was knowing I needed to enter the property market however I could, buy whatever I could that served my circumstance at that time. And once I had done that, it's almost like you walk a mile and then you see a mile. So once
Mm.
I had that first property, then the conversation started to change. Then it's like, okay, cool. Well, how can I leverage that existing property that I have now that I've maybe built up, a bit of equity there, and the conversation sort of changed to, all right, well, let's put that equity to good use and maybe look at a second property. And then, fast forwarding this conversation a little bit, went and bought that second property. And then the conversation changes yet again, because then it's like, all right, well, now you've got two properties under your belt and the strategy needs to kind of shift, or the conversation kind of needs to shift, to suit where I am in that journey. So
Mm.
yeah, that's kind of it for me. It's like just needed to commit to the next best option or the next best thing that I needed to do, focus on that, achieve that, and then almost organically it's like the next step appeared.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you very
Mm.
much. I love it when you sound a little bit like us as well. We like talking equity and the uplift. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. So let's go through that. So the journey that you had, you bought your first property. I'm going to recall it's about 23 years old. You bought your first property. Uncommon because some 23 years. The average first time buyer age is around 37, 36, 37.
Mm.
So to buy at 23, you're well below that average. How does someone get into the market at 23 years old?
Well, again, it's like you walk a mile and see a mile. So my dad was very insistent on, when you get your first paycheck, you're paying yourself first. So 10% of my first Brumbies paycheck, which was $60 for the week when I was 13 and 9 months, that 10% went into like a little savings account that I actually didn't see. And I had worked at Brumbies for the next, I think, 2 to 3 years, and it's 10% of every check that I got automatically was put into that little account. And then when I finished school, my dad gave me access to that account and he said, hey, this is that account that you were, siphoning money into. It's now a good little chunk of change. Let's have a conversation about what it looks like, you actually utilizing that. Like, what are you going to do with that money? I had decided, and I got into such a habit. I think like habits are such an important thing as well,
Mm.
of just putting that 10% away every time I receive my paycheck, doing that up until I was sort of around 21, 22, where I built that up to a good substantial little savings account. And that's when I was like, actually, this is probably enough to entertain the idea of potentially buying an apartment. And then so that's really what kind of spurred the conversation. I was Googling, how do I buy a property? And then number one, talk to a mortgage broker. I'm like, great, let me go and find a mortgage broker and chat to them and sort of understand what that pathway looks like. So yeah, I guess that's how I potentially entered the property market so early. It's just that I had been saving since I was 13 and had instilled that habit of just putting money away, putting the money away until I kind of built it to a point where I was like, actually, it's probably time to put this to good use, because I'm not going to, save my way to wealth necessarily, and need to start making that money actually work. And alongside that, I'd always really been interested in kind of like self-development. So I was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was 15, and all of those sorts of books and education I was sort of absorbing along the way as well. So I think I also had a little bit of a foundation around the mindset of investor, and putting your money to work, not keeping it in a bank account, and like the whole like theory of inflation, and you're not going to beat inflation if you just constantly save and not actually do something with the money that you have. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a level of like you've self-awareness, but there's also a level of like intelligence around finance that you've built up.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's a real credit to what you've done there to lay some good foundations habits wise. And if you listen to this episode, we just did another episode with her name's Natasha. Tash Invests is kind of her social handle, speaking about that exact paradigm, which is save money, pay yourself first, save
Mhm.
a certain portion, and you don't even see it, and it's just going to sit there in the background and start to accumulate. And that level of compounding, for example, you can save, and it accrues some interest, and then invested versus save, and trying to keep saving. It's like that money just doesn't really work. You're working hard for your money, but your money's not working hard for you, is what's happening. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Beautiful. So you got property 1, and then you're thinking, okay, got some equity here, now property 2. How does that transition then happen as well? Especially, we're still in your 20s.
Mhm. So I was listening to a podcast that you were a guest on, actually,
Okay.
and I was like, "Oh, this guy's super interesting," because he spoke about the theory of equity and utilizing equity to sort of build a portfolio, and so that was a new sort of concept to me, and I was really intrigued by that. And then it just so happened that you were actually at an event that I was a few months later, and I had the opportunity to speak to you in person, and really like enjoyed the lunch that we had, and again picked your brain a little bit more. And then I think a few weeks later, I had a call with you, and I had been in that same sort of mindset of, saving 10% of my income. So I had built up another little nest egg, and I was like, okay, maybe this is time for me to buy another property. And when we had spoken, you sort of quizzed me on my existing property, and you said, you know what, Carla, I think you actually have some good equity in your existing property that we can have a look at and see if that can help with your next transaction. And so it was really just talking to you, and then you coming back to me and going, yep, there is actually some equity there. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, I was like, I don't know if this is like legit, but Aaron reckons that we don't actually have to put any of our cash in if we want to buy our next property. We can just utilize the existing equity in this apartment. And that was just crazy to me. Like, what? I hadn't come across that strategy before. And so again, it just opened up a whole new can of worms, and got really excited about that. And then sort of knowing that there was some equity I could use, and then actually utilize some of the deposit that we had saved for the second property, sort of opened up a bigger net on the type of property that we could get as our second one. So yeah, that's sort of the process. Once we knew how much we could then borrow for the second property, it then was straight to realestate.com.au and putting in all the criteria and seeing what we could find, and then running the numbers on the properties that we shortlisted to make it work.
Yeah, nice. I guess, yeah, I said we're not going to give away any intimate details of, numbers or what it's worth. But, I mean, we know that you went and bought another unit, for example. You're living on the Gold Coast, bought another unit. And some people go, don't buy units, for example. You've got to buy freestanding homes. And it's like, I think you ignore the naysayers. You're like, look, I'm just going to do what I want. And I'm going to stick to my strategy. And you went and bought a unit. And again, it did really, really well, right? So how did you shut out the noise? Because there's, once you start going down this rabbit hole of like what to buy, where to buy, the algorithm starts to follow you, and you're going to get served up all, all the buyer's agents and things like that. How did you double down on your strategy and kind of get really ironclad with what you were buying and where you were buying?
Yeah, good question. I was actually thinking about this, and it popped up for me professionally as well. So we're dealing with some stuff at work, and sort of the input that I had there was, well, what do the numbers say? So that was my sort of solution, or my question when we were discussing a challenge at work. And I realized that that has always been my method, or my framework for making decisions, is sort of asking, well, what do the numbers say? And I think that comes from my steel energy or my analytical brain. And so I was just focused on yield and making sure that I wasn't going to be, paying too much into this second property, that the rent that I was going to receive was going to cover the mortgage repayments and all the expenses, and there was going to be a little bit extra at the end. And sort of that's how I shortlisted the properties, and then ultimately knew how much I could pay for a property that met that criteria and that yield that I was hoping to achieve. So for me, it was probably less of an emotional decision, and sort of like a criteria around has to be land, or has to be apartment, or has to be 2 bedroom, or location as such. For me, it was more about the numbers on the deal. Like, did it make sense? Did it work? Could I afford it? Did I get the yield that I wanted to get? And that sort of right or wrong was a strategy that I went with. And 5 years later or 6 years later, it's worked out in my favor. So I'm glad that I made those purchases back when I did.
Excellent. I mean, we come across a lot of people who have both. They have the equity inside properties and they've got the borrowing capacity. I mean, plenty of investors that have that available to them, but they still don't pull the trigger, right? There's something about you where you got given the information and then you decided to act on it. What forced your hand? What made you pull the trigger?
Probably leaning on that foundational knowledge that I had, which was like, you got to make your money work for you. At the moment, it's just, earning minimal interest in my bank account, like feeling like I needed to put it to good use. But then also bringing it back to the mentors in my life, like they are already 4 or 5 steps ahead of where I am right now. So sort of, tapping into their advice and sort of saying, like, if you were in my position, not telling me what to do, but just knowing my circumstances or the situation, like, what advice would you have? And like 100% of the time, my mentors would say, I wish I just bought more property when I could. Like, the sooner you can buy it, the better. It's a long-term game. You're holding on to it for the long term. Sure, it might go up and down, but if you're in it for the end game, like, just buy as much as you can when you can and just hold on to it. And that was kind of the like reaffirming information that I was getting over and over and over again. So it's like, if you ask the questions and you get the answers, you're going to have to take action on those answers. Otherwise, don't even ask the questions, type of thing. So for me, yeah, that was it. It's just like, figure out who you want to model, who inspires you, who has what you have, who's 5 steps ahead of you, and then like just really leverage their advice and their intel. And at that time, it was just, if you can buy it and hold it.
Well done. Well done. You're such a great student. And then the fears that come up, because again, you can do your research, you can do your numbers, you can do all your due diligence, but then there's some natural hesitations and fears come up, and you've probably run the gauntlet of what we've had 13 rate rises. So over the time you've experienced, since you're bought, you've experienced rate rises as well, which impacts cash flow. What fears, hesitations did you have? Have any of those fears actually come to fruition? For example, take us through that journey as well.
So I'm super, super frugal in the fact that I get very nervous if I don't have maximum buffers around me. So I knew that from very very early into the journey, that you always want to have like a separate buffer account to sort of cover the shortfall, not if the rates increase, but when the rates increase. And so I kind of had that certainty, I guess, where I actually and I don't say this crudely, but I actually didn't care if the rates went up, you know, 3 times, 5 times in a row, 6 times in a row, because I had already sort of planned for that at the start of the purchase. So knowing that I had been putting money away for a rainy day, should that come or when that comes. So it just gave me that extra certainty, and I'm very risk adverse. So I knew that I needed to have that account, to have that confidence, in order to go and make those transactions. And even if the rates increased in the short term, like the minute I bought the property, if they all of a sudden just started to skyrocket, I knew that I did have that buffer account for that exact purpose, to cover any shortfall that might happen. So yeah, it's also, I guess, knowing your risk profile and then doing what you can to make sure that you've covered yourself, so that you do have the confidence to then go out and make those decisions.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. And then your next purchase, take us through what you've bought next.
Yeah, so bought the initial property, and then figured out that I could use this thing called equity, bought the second property, then bought a third property, so a third apartment in the same building as my second apartment, because for some reason, it's like it was an amazing development or amazing building, but was just way under market compared to the other properties in the area. And I had noticed that quite early on when I had purchased the second one. So the agent who sold me the second one said, "Hey, we actually have another one literally right above. Like, are you interested in that one?" And because I got it off market, saved some money on the purchase price there. Called you in a rush again, said, "Hey, like, I need to kind of know in the next 24 hours, like, is this something we can do?" You know, ran all the numbers again, made sense, purchased that one. So at that stage, had 3 apartments, and then the strategy kind of changed. So COVID hit. I had been with my partner for quite a while, and we had only ever lived in apartments. We had got 2 dogs as well. So at that stage, we were living in our 1-bedroom apartment with 2 dogs and 2 adults. So it was very squishy. And it was COVID. So we're all in the apartment 24/7. And we sort of just realized that, yeah, cool, we can continue with the strategy that we have, where it's, you know, basically building our portfolio, buying apartments and renting them out, and sort of, you know, going down that trajectory. But we realized and decided that we kind of wanted to pivot the strategy to suit where we were in our life, and kind of now what we wanted to get out of life as a soon to be married couple, and with a couple of dogs. And I guess, like, yeah, the desire changed. So then we decided what we were going to do is capitalize on the market in the Gold Coast, because it had gone gangbusters. We actually sold 2 of our apartments in order to buy our dream home at an absolute steal. And we decided that that was the best strategy for us at the time, because we had felt like we didn't have a home base, and it sort of had become this like situation where we were so focused on buying the next investment property, next property, next property, we probably weren't enjoying the journey anymore the way that maybe we had thought we were going to. So we decided to pivot instead, buy our dream home, make that our foundation. We still have the other investment property, and almost like hit reset a little bit, and continue with the strategy now that we've got our house and we're not going to be moving. We're going to stay here for the next 10, 15, 20 years. It just gave us a little bit more confidence, and yeah, a little bit more, I keep saying the word foundation, but that's honestly what it feels like. So the strategy is still in place, but it did have a bit of a pivot to suit, you know, the lifestyle that we want now. So that's our current situation. So now we've got our dream home, we've got the investment property, and then we're starting to map out, okay, cool, when are we going to make that next purchase? And so that's kind of the new focus.
It's so exciting. I hear that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, those properties served you for a time, and it gave you that was the enabler to help you buy your family home. And that's kind of it's quite a conversation I have a lot of people that go down this investing path, which is we're renting, we'll keep buying investment properties, but at some point the bug bites, and it's like we actually want to put down roots. We want to have our own home. You, in this case, you have pets, which when you have your own home, or if you're renting, for example, you need more room for pets. If you think about having kids, for example, in the future, where are we going to send our kids to school? And then you want to have that stability and security going. We don't have to move anywhere. We want our own little piece of paradise as well. And I feel like you're unapologetic about the strategy. It's like, hey, those properties, we don't have to hold on to them. You know, the rule that you never sell your first investment property, that goes out the windows, but it's because it's part of a bigger picture going, but what got us here won't get us there. And those properties have served a purpose. We're going to cash in, take the money, go and buy our own home. And then at some point we can come back into the property market and start to invest more in the future as well.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add to that as well is we would never in a million years be able to buy our dream home if we hadn't had made those property decisions 7-8 years ago and bought that first one. Like I guess like the profit on those two properties that we made, we could never have saved enough to have that deposit for the dream home. And so that's kind of what I was saying at the start of the chat, was like, you kind of don't realize the impact on the decisions that you make today until 5-10 years down the line. So in some way you just kind of have to trust the journey, and make that decision and stay on course and trust the strategy, because later down the track it's going to make all of the difference, and it surely did for us. So we're super grateful.
Excellent. I really want to commend you because you've taken action. You haven't taken no for an answer, and that's something that I really love about you. I think one of the more recent purchases, things weren't going that well smoothly, and I'll put it on the record, like it wasn't going, and you had the courage to ring me and go, hey mate, this isn't going as smoothly as the other purchases. What's going on here? Like, jumped back in there and had a look. It's like, yeah, mate, we need to make this right. And that's something that you need to call out rather than kind of suffering in silence. Go, hey, look, if things aren't going as smoothly or you hit a few road bumps, it's like, that's okay. It's part of the journey. But then being able to have that open communication with your team and going, how do we address this as well? I think is a real kudos to you.
Yeah. I think it's important definitely to have that team that you trust and they sort of know your vision beside you. But something John had said to me early on is, no one's ever going to care about your money as much as you do. And so if you feel like something's not happening the way it should, or you kind of have that sense, like 100% speak up, because at the end of the day, like it's your journey and it's your purchase and it's your transaction. So I kind of learned that early on, that just to trust your gut with anything when you kind of have that feeling.
Great. If you've got younger people and you're probably around younger people and they're looking to you now, Carla, going, how do I get into the market? It's so expensive, for example. And truth be told, I mean, you're on a good income, but you're not on like the super highest income band, right? So people going, how do I get into the market on a limited income? What would be your advice to them?
I'm actually having this conversation with my sister at the moment, so it's very timely. So like, I guess with her, it's kind of just sharing what has worked for me. So it's, goes back to that age old, don't spend more than you can afford and pay yourself first and start building up that little nest egg. Also having like the goals. So what I've sort of noticed is everyone loves to have the chat, right? So I'd love to have the chat of, oh, I want to buy a property, I would love to move, love to own my own home. But it's like, okay, and like, so what does that look like? When do you want to buy your house? Like, what does that look like? What do you need to do in order to get to that? Like, kind of breaking it down and kind of setting goals or targets around it. So I think that's probably the starting point. So conversation with my sister is, when do you want to buy your next, or when do you want to buy your property? 3 years time. Okay, great. How much do you think you'll need for a deposit in 3 years? X amount. Great. How much will you need to save each year in order to have that? This. Great. How much do you have to put away every single month for that? Every single week? Like, I think the goal of owning a house can be so overwhelming, but for me, again, going back to that analytical brain, it's like just breaking it down, like, what's the next step? you don't have to get so overwhelmed with it. It's like just breaking down what that end goal is and what's the next thing that I need to do. Well, the next thing is I need to set up an automatic $200 a week goes into an account. And, in the meantime, I'm going to absorb all of the content that I can on the purchasing journey and, investment strategy and et cetera, to the point where you look back in 3 years and go, oh, I've actually got a really good deposit. I'm ready to have that chat with the mortgage broker, figure out what my borrowing capacity is. And then that kind of lays the foundation on, well, where can I look? What kind of property can I get? And then sort of taking action there. I think the other thing I already alluded to was it's for me, what I've learned, it's time in the market, not necessarily timing the market. So like conversation that sometimes happens is Gold Coast has been booming for a while. Like at some stage, there's going to be a downturn, and I'm just not going to purchase anything until I see what happens in 2 years' time. I just feel like 2 years is like such a long time that you could have already got into the market and probably held for the 2 years, and it's most likely going to grow in the next 2 years. And like I would be kicking myself if I didn't enter it 2 years ago when I could have, if you know what I mean. So I sort of also have that conversation with my sister. It's like we might not be able to get you into the 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house yet, but let's have a look at a little 2-bedroom apartment that's super cute, close to all your amenities. Let's focus on getting you into that first. And then when you're in there, then let's figure out, okay, well, what do you want to buy next? Do you want to upgrade into your own house, or are you happy with the apartment and let's figure out another investment property instead? So that's probably the other thing that I would urge people to consider is just getting in where you can, not necessarily waiting until you can afford the big house on a big acreage or something like that.
I love it. Yeah, I guess we sing from the same hymn sheet, Carla, which is, we're always saying buy what you can, when you can, where you can. And the other one is the property market rewards action takers and decision makers. And the amount of people that have the opportunity to buy, they've got the equity, they've got the borrowing capacity, and they're not pulling the trigger, they'll regret it come 5-10 years time going, I could have bought and geez, look what property cost then. And 5-10 years time, properties have moved so much. And they're like, now they're living with regret as well. That's a very hard place to move forward on as well. Carla, I want to say thank you very much. Like I said, it takes a brave person to come on here and talk about their journey as well. Most people think we have to share intimate details of loan to value ratios or how much deposit or how much properties are worth, and that's certainly not the case here at all. So if you're listening, and a few people have reached out saying, hey, can we have a chat? If you're listening and you want to share your journey, please drop us a DM. We'd love to have you on, because this is what I call the ripple effect. Carla, what your story does is it just inspires the next person, and it's going to reach someone that you wouldn't even have met in your life that's going to be inspired by what you've done. Properties that you bought before the age of 30, they're going, it can be done. It just needs the right mindset, needs the right team, and you need to have the right skills in place as well, which is how you've managed your money. So I want to say a real credit to you. It's been an absolute pleasure serving. I look forward to seeing what the future has in store for you as well.
Thanks, Aaron. It's been fun chatting. I love it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I think we'll get back on at some point in the future when you buy that next investment property. What do you reckon?
Sounds good.
Awesome. If you love this chat, please let us know. We love the messages that are coming in. So drop us a DM. If you've got any other questions that you want answered, please do reach out. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.